We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Friday weekend edition. And first of all, I want to say that it has been a while since I've actually been in front of this microphone, because we did take our trip to both Greece and Turkey. It was outstanding. And I certainly want to say hello to the people that were on the bus with us and then on the ship, because we, of course, had to take a ship to go to Patmos and Ephesus and Crete and a variety of other places. And it was a great time. And then even though I was back on Tuesday, the way schedule worked out, this is actually the first time I could actually be on the program live. So first of all, I want to thank Dr. Merrill Matthews is in studio. You covered for me 2 days, right?
I did.
And we also had Penn Dexter do 2 days and Liberty McCarter 2 days. So again, I don't see any trip I'm taking until I think we're going to do a live broadcast maybe from a radio station in July. So you got me now back in the saddle. But let me just mention that today we're going to cover a lot of things and do the best we can. Some victories, especially coming from our good friends at First Liberty. Some really good commentaries by Dr. Merrill Matthews that appeared in The Hill to clear up a lot of misinformation about this. Got to talk about tariffs, the on-again, off-again tariffs, and all the judicial issues there. We'll talk about Harvard and the back and forth between Harvard and, of course, the Trump administration. If we have time, I want to get into how progressive activists broke corporate America, and, of course, Penn Dexter's piece on the success sequence. Don't know that we'll have time, but we're not ignoring the fact that more books are coming out saying that President Biden wasn't up to the task mentally. Who knew?
Who knew?
Who knew? And then the
Apparently none of the standard media in Washington.
Nobody knew, so we may have some fun with that, and the auto pen and a variety of other things. We may or may not get to that. But first of all, I thought it would be fun to go around the round table. First of all, of course, Jeff Mateer is Executive Vice President and Chief Legal Officer for First Liberty. Dr. Merrill Matthews, of course, resident scholar with the Institute for Policy Innovation and the author of a couple of these articles we'll talk about. But Jeff, let's go to you, because one of the things that we've posted, I posted 2 press releases, but one victory after another. You're getting tired of winning yet? But nevertheless, these are one of the victories in this Texas state legislature, which give us a model for what other states around the country can do.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, we never get tired of winning at all, and because there was a day where there weren't many wins,
That's
so we
right.
have to take advantage of this. But yeah, it's a good day to be a Texan, and certainly if you're a fan of religious liberty, because like anybody who lives in Texas knows that most of the work gets done in the last week of the session. And we're in the last week of the legislative session. And they have really done well for themselves in protecting religious liberty. At the top of the list is that they've passed a law that they've passed legislation that's now at Governor Abbott's desk to require the posting of the 10 Commandments in schoolrooms.
Isn't that amazing?
And I grew up in an age where the 10 Commandments were removed.
Yes.
from
1980.
from the schoolrooms.
Yeah.
But our victory in our Coach Kennedy case, which completely changes the way and restores the way courts are to interpret Establishment Clause challenges, paves the way for what we believe very much the constitutionality of posting the 10 Commandments. And so we're excited that a senator from west of Fort Worth, Phil King, I don't know if you've ever had Phil on the show.
We have.
Just a great.
We've had Phil King and Matt Krause, because he's been involved with you too.
And Matt is Matt works with me at First Liberty now as co-counsel of counsel, and so we were successful in helping helping Senator King and drafting legislation, and the result is I'm pretty certain that Governor Abbott will sign that. That would be a huge shock if he didn't. But to have that, but that's not the only thing that the legislature's done. There are actually 3 other bills. One being the Coach Kennedy bill, which of course we love because of our former client, or actually current client as well, Coach Kennedy. It puts into law that in Texas, teachers, coaches, school district staff, all public employees can engage in religious speech or prayer in the school building, that they're, or on the athletic field, that they're not that they don't have to check their religion at the schoolhouse gates. So we think our Kennedy case stands for that, but we're glad to see the Texas legislature adopt that. And the other one that really, I'm really excited because I'm excited about the client that we work with on this issue. There's a ministry called LifeWise out of Ohio who's now active. I think they're active in about 1,000 schools across the country. And this great ministry, it's a great idea, which is they go to public schools and say, will you release your students to come and where they receive religious instruction? And this has been very, very successful in Ohio. It's successful in Florida. And we were able to work with LifeWise, with our friend Matt Krause, and have the Texas legislature pass a law that tells school districts that you can allow the dismissal, the discharge for students to leave campus, go to religious a place where they can receive religious instruction, and they'll get course credit for that. So, really, really important piece of legislation.
Let me just mention before I get to Dr. Matthews that we did interviews with Joel Penton of LifeWise, both in 2023 and 2024. So if you'd like to know more, we have all that information on our website. And that also is the second press release about the Texas legislature passes a bill allowing students to attend off-campus religious instruction for course credit.
And Jeff, with respect to the Ten Commandments, does the school can fulfill the obligation by just, say, posting a large one at the entry, or does it need to be in every classroom? I just don't know the particulars.
It's specifically in the classrooms.
Every classroom. Then.
Yeah.
Does that include charter schools, and could that include private schools as well?
Well, private schools can do it themselves, but it's directed at all public school classrooms.
Private schools could do it themselves, but I'm just wondering if the mandate extends to private schools. So
no, it's public schools,
and that would be charters also because they're public schools.
Because they're public, yes.
Yeah. So let me just mention real quickly. Some of you might say, "Okay, great that happened in Texas," but we have given to you two press releases: one on the Ten Commandments bill, as well as prayer and school bills, and that's SB 1011 and SB 960. And so, first of all, this could be something you could take to your legislator. And I recognize it might be a little bit more of an uphill slog in California, New York, Illinois. But most of you are able to maybe take this to your legislator and say, why can't we do this? And if they want a model piece of legislation, there it is. Then we also, of course, talked about the very good organization we've done some interviews with, LifeWise. And maybe this is something that you may already have in your school or would like to know more about, and that's the second one. So again, I recognize we are a national program, and sometimes people in other states say, well, I'm glad that's happened in Texas. What does that mean to me? What it means is these can be model pieces of legislation that you could use, and if they need any information, I suspect they could call you there, First Liberty.
Yeah, and we're working in several states, so Arkansas, Georgia, just to name a couple.
Yes. So again, that gets us started in a good way. A little bit later, I'm going to give you a prayer target because June 4th is when you have a very important case, but I'll leave that near the end. When we come back, okay, you've heard a lot about these tariffs, on again, off again. What about this? Let's get into it, and we'll be back right after these messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, one phrase I frequently use on my radio program is this. Each year, researchers spend millions of dollars to discover what most moms already know. This comment certainly applies to a study reported a few weeks ago in Fortune. Here's the headline. Women are more empathetic than men. Study of hundreds of thousands of people finds. Women are more empathetic than men. Who knew? Just about everybody with a little common sense, but we live in a world that seems lacking in common sense. This was best illustrated by a sarcastic tweet posted by Dr. Michael Brown. He said this study leads to two startling revelations. First, there is such a thing as women and men. Second, there are real differences between women and men. I thought we couldn't give an accurate definition of a woman. We have a Supreme Court justice who could not answer the question, what is a woman? We also have the film documentary by Matt Walsh, What is a Woman?, that provides numerous interviews with experts who cannot answer that question. But if you're going to be doing a study of the differences between men and women, I would think you would have to have a clear understanding of how to define the two sexes. Of course, the researchers had to ask the question in a politically correct way. What was your biological sex assigned at birth? Of course, the second point about men and women being different is also controversial in our politically correct society. 30 years ago, relationship counselor John Gray wrote the book, Men Are From Mars, Women From Venus. It has sold at least 15 million copies. But if the book came out today, I suspect there would be protest in the streets. Let's applaud a study that confirms the obvious and challenges some of the crazy woke ideas in our society. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you're trying to make sense of the tariffs on again, off again, well, you're not the only one. There are a lot of people trying to figure out what is happening. And there have been people that have said that what is happening is tariffs on a whim. Now, if that seems unfair, let me use some of the numbers. This one comes from Jim Garrity, but there are others that have those, but I think his numbers work as well. If you just look over the last 115 days, the tariff rate on goods from China have changed 6 times. Well, it's really hard to get any predictability if you're a business person. I've met some people that talk about how this is affecting their own business. If you want to look at all of those, in those 115 days, there have been 8 major tariff announcements and at least 55 tariff changes. So if you are wondering about what the future is with these tariffs, you're not the only one, and people whose livelihood depends on it is the case. And so I knew this would be one that Dr. Merrill Matthews would like to weigh in on.
It's been difficult. Today, let's see, we're past noon today, so are tariffs on or are they off? Because yesterday they were off based upon a international trade court, and then a appeals court came and put them back on, and then Trump said something about China not working very well, and so the stock market went down. And before the day is out, or by tomorrow, he may say, I had a discussion with President Xi, and we're moving forward, and everything looks good, and the market goes back up. But to your point, businesses have no idea what to do on this. And there are an awful lot of businesses where most of their material product comes from China. And based upon some of the things from the Secretary of Commerce, Lutnick, he sort of implied that he wanted all kinds of businesses coming back, even things that take, minute stuff that lower income, less trained people can do. But Trump came out earlier this week saying, what I want is high quality, high tech things, jobs coming to the United States. So that means you don't necessarily want T-shirts coming or sneakers and things of that nature, because those are labor intensive and they don't make. It takes takes low-income people to do that. So we don't know where we are on this. And one of the interesting things that's developing is there are free trade zones developing in the United States where you can ship products to there and keep them there, and you don't pay the tariff until you take it out of the free trade zone. And there's been a movement to greatly expand the free trade zones to bring the products in so you can wait till the good time. And, farmers used to do this. They hold their crops until, things are up in the market. I'm going to sell them now. So it's been very, very confusing. And you even had the head of GM, Mary Barra, saying this week, all in favor of what Trump is doing on the tariffs, even though it's apparently going to cost GM $5 or $7 billion in some of the tariffs they would have to pay. And just 4 years ago, Mary Barra was all for electric vehicles and said, we're moving all to electric vehicles by 2025. I think she said 40 or 50% of our cars and trucks will be electric. They've put all that on hold and pushed it back because of just the uncertainty that's going on in the market.
Well, again, you would not want to have the job right now of the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, or this Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. And yet they have to go out there and pitch this every single day. We like Donald Trump. We like a lot of policies of Donald Trump. This one has been one where it has not worked very well. But I also wanted to get another perspective because the on again, off again comes from judges. And you had the U.S. Court of International Trade. I venture to say that maybe 1 out of 1,000 of our listeners even know what the U.S. Court of International Trade is. I know you do, certainly. But one of the things, Jeff, because you know at least one of the judges there, they said it was going to be unlawful. They wanted to block that, turn right around. And then you had the Federal Appeals Court, a full 11-member panel unanimously put a stay on that. And that's part of the up and down and the confusion in the stock market, isn't it?
No, it exactly is. And actually, I don't know. I had a friend that during the first term of the Trump administration actually got appointed to that court. I had to even ask him, what does that court do again?
Nobody knows what this thing is.
Is that Article? Is an Article 3? Look, there's the policy, and we can debate the policy, but there's also the whether something is whether the president has power,
right?
Mm-hmm. And it's hard in this one. Even if you want to support President Trump and you support the policy, tariffs are needed. Let's say let's take that as a given, and I think we could debate that. But let's take a given that there have been unfair trade practices by other countries, and we need to be engaged in. Get that. The problem is the Constitution,
right?
I'm actually somebody who actually believes the words mean something.
Yes.
I mean, if you believe in the words mean something and that we're bound by those words, then it's pretty clear. The language of the Constitution: lay and collect taxes. Okay, it's not that duties, imposts, and excises, and to regulate commerce with foreign nations. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not the power given to the president. That's the power given to the Congress.
You got it.
And I get that we have we for years, decades, have had a do-nothing Congress who don't do their jobs. And that's been the frustration of a lot of executives. But anyone who says, oh, you guys are beating up on Trump and how you beat on Trump, if Barack Obama had done this, now Joe Biden wouldn't have known he's done it, so we're not going to use him as an example. But
somebody in the administration would have done it for him.
If Barack Obama had done this, what would we be saying as conservatives? What would we be saying? And one of the things that we've constantly stood against is, and the response of the Trump administration would be, no, we're acting pursuant to a statute that gave us authority when there are emergencies. Mm-hmm. And so there's an emergency, a self-declared emergency, and therefore we can do this. The problem with that is we've often criticized Obama, Biden for saying things are emergencies, and when they're not real emergencies. If emergencies are anything, well, then that word means nothing. And so I think that's the problem. Now, this is going to be decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. And then we're going to have, we'll have the president upset that the 3 judges that he put on the court don't support him. I could see a unanimous ruling against Trump on this.
I think so as well. And the problem is there was legislation that Congress passed that, as you suggest, in the case of emergency, a president has limited authority to be able to go out and impose tariffs. And Barack Obama did, George W. Bush did, and others have done that. And Bill Clinton, usually on an item or two. And you might not think it's emergency, but it was so small, nobody really worried about it too much. But we've got tariffs on Antarctica. We've got tariffs on Australia and England, where we both had trade surpluses. So the problem is the president has taken this and is doing a huge thing, and I think that's going to undermine him. You can make a case, as Jeff said, that tariffs are needed in certain cases, especially with China. You might make a case that there's a reason for doing some of that in some cases, or for doing some reciprocal tariffs in some cases. But you can't make the case that it's an emergency, that everything that comes in here, including toy manufacturers, are suing because of the tariffs that are going to be hitting some of the toy manufacturers. You can't make a case it's a national emergency if somebody can't get their little toy. So it's a problem, and I think Trump's going to lose this, and as you say, he's going to be mad if he does.
He's very mad.
Let me just use an illustration that you've used before, and that is how lots of times Joe Biden would take some obscure piece of legislation and misread it. What we're talking about here is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, which again was for an emergency and applied it. And back to the same point, we on this program before consistently have said Biden sometimes takes some law that was never intended to be used that way and reinterpret it, knowing full well that it probably would get thrown out by the Supreme Court. So if we're going to play it fair, it seems like the Trump administration's doing the same thing.
And, I think Trump, if he had come in with a consistent policy on tariffs that were reasonable and made a certain amount of sense, he could have moved forward. Whether that's good policy or not, he could have done that, and I think people would generally have supported that. But the up and down, back and forth, we've got tariffs today, tomorrow we don't. I'm changing the rate today, tomorrow I'm going to change it again, just has not worked well.
Yes. We're going to take a break. When we come back, though, I want to talk about behind the scenes, because Donald Trump got a little frustrated. 3 of the judges on the court, one was a Reagan appointee, one Obama appointee, and one a Trump appointee, and they all worked against him because they were unanimous. But he had some things to say about the Federalist Society and a few others. So I want to get into that because you can kind of see some behind the scenes issues as well. And again, let me give you a chance if you want to make some comments. Of course, you can give us a call. You can maybe leave a note as you're watching this online or on Facebook. There's some great ways in which you can interact with us. But if you find yourself saying, okay, I would like to go to school on this, the third article, I called it Tariff Power and Congress. It gives you the Constitution. It gives you the names of some of these things, the U.S. Court of International Trade, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. If you really want to go to school on it, and it only takes a couple of pages to read, and it's very easy, that's on the website. And we put it up there so that you can do your own work. I think you'll come to the same conclusion, but if not, we'd love to hear from you. Let's take a break. We've got a few more things to say before we get into the issue of Medicaid, but that's coming up next, right after this.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you would like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Been talking about tariffs. We'll stay on that a little bit longer. Might take a phone call or two on that and then move on to Medicaid. Lots of misinformation. Quite frankly, you might even call it disinformation. It's a political year. We recognize that. But nevertheless, we want to try to straighten some of that out. And Dr. Merrill Matthews' article is a very good one, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But let me come back to the fact we have Jeff Mateer, Merrill Matthews in studio. But Jeff, we talked about the fact that the three judges on the court that ruled against Donald Trump, one of them was a Trump appointee. And I'm noticing some real fussing coming from the Trump administration and from Donald Trump himself about the Federalist Society and the leader of that organization for recommending some of these individuals who now, in this particular case, voted against one of his attempts to use the International Emergency Economic Powers Act.
Yeah, we started the show today talking about winning. Donald Trump likes to win. and if someone's viewed as an obstacle to winning, that's what you get. So we saw last night, I think it's around 7 o'clock last night is when it was sent to me that the president posted on his Truth social some statements. And clearly looking at it, he's very frustrated what happened with regard to the ruling from the U.S. Court of International Trade on his tariffs, and then was happy that the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit had reversed that decision. And then he goes on to say, well, who are those judges? And which was great until I think he realized one of them was he put on and therefore then went and decided he was going to blame the Federalist Society and then specifically it's one of its leaders, Leonard Leo, and said some really unkind things about Leonard Leo.
Yes.
And I know Leonard. I know him pretty well. And obviously the president is very upset. I don't know if the president actually, after he thought about it, if he actually believes today what he said. But because I think Leonard Leo actually served him. Know a lot of the men and women that went on to the court. These are people like, someone we talk about often, Judge James Ho, Matthew Kaczmarek, both good men who the Federalist Society recommended to the president to go on the courts. And look, when you're putting 200 plus people on the court, you're not going to bat 1,000. I would submit to you that prior Republican presidents batted very low.
Yes.
Anthony Kennedy, David Souter, just to name a few. And so
make my head hurt.
And I don't think, and when you think of someone like Justices Gorsuch, Barrett, and Kavanaugh, although I haven't agreed with them 100% of the time, nowhere near the disagreement that I've had over the years with Justice Souter and Justice Kennedy, quite frankly, Justice O'Connor, who are also Republicans put on. So, look, the Federalist Society is an admiral. I'm a member. I remain a member, and it has brought back to the forefront things like that we were talking about earlier today, originalist interpretation of the Constitution. The results being, how do we win the Coach Kennedy case? Well, we win the Coach Kennedy case because it not just Justices Alito and Thomas, but because we had Kavanaugh, Barrett, and Gorsuch with us. And so I think the president was pretty hot when he wrote that message.
We should apologize because that's a good organization because you're next. All it takes is one of the judges, First Liberty, recommended.
And one of our, we had one of my former colleagues this week. Another former colleague was nominated by President Trump. Jordan Pratt was nominated to be a judge in the federal court in Florida, and so we're obviously very, very excited about that. Good man. and he's already on the Florida Court of Appeals. DeSantis put him on that, and now Trump is elevating him to the federal court. Great pick, but he would be endorsed by the Federalist Society, and so again, people don't bat 1,000. I get that the president is upset about this, but at the end of the day, I know when we look for people to partner with at First Liberty, when we look for employees at First Liberty, for lawyers, you're not going to look to the ABA. You look to the Federalist Society.
The Federalist Society is the group that pulled together the list of potential judges for Trump during the first term,
yes.
And they got a lot of grief from the media and the left for that, because Trump was essentially saying, I'm going to draw from this list of judges, which I think he did, and Leonard Leo left a little while after that to I think he was working with a foundation and was handing out a lot of money to conservative groups that were helping promote the conservative cause. So I have nothing but good things to say about Leonard Leo.
Yes.
So if we're not all, even people who generally support Trump will sometimes disagree on some aspects of it, and that should not lead to a divorce just because you disagree with him on something.
And again, if you see somebody criticizing First Liberty or Federalist Society, especially if it's Southern Poverty Law Center, you go, that's a badge of honor. But even when sometimes the president may say something. And so one of our themes here is check it out, have some discernment. And I just thought we would mention that, sort of one of those back stories that you didn't probably hear anywhere else.
One more thing I'll say about this. It is actually in the policy world, it is good to disagree with a leader every now and then.
I think
because
so.
that allows you to say, I am not a shill for that person. I'm not a yes man. I sometimes disagree. So in the policy world, having some disagreements actually enhances your credibility, because you're no longer considered to be a yes man who does anything the president says.
Well, and one of the things that we pride ourselves on at First Liberty is, when you look at judges and judicial appointments, look at what they've done in the past.
Yeah.
It's not who you know, who's your best friend. Oh, you're friends with a U.S. senator or something like that. We think you can actually predict where judges will rule and how they will rule based upon what work they've done in the past. If they've been a judge at a different level, you can look at their decisions. But if they've been a lawyer, you can look at the clients they're representative. So we pride ourselves on having the data. And so what we are doing, what we did during Trump's first term, what we're doing now is we're providing the data to the decision makers. Obviously, at the end of the day, it's up to the president, it's up to the senators, to make the recommendations, and the president to make the final decision on the nomination. But we want them to have the data, and so I think you can look at even judges appointed by Donald Trump, that he did so based upon, now I don't know if it was based upon a Leonard Leo recommendation. It's usually based upon a recommendation of a senator. Mm-hmm. But you can look at, and at First Liberty, there were some people who were proposed to be nominated. They were friends with somebody, and then we were able to show the data. And I'll just give one quick example. There are appointments being made and recommendations. We had some names that were sent to us. We looked at the data and we pointed out, well, in this case being someone in Texas for a position, what do you know? He gave to Beto O'Rourke. He gave to Beto. Mm-hmm. Well, do we really? Should Donald Trump be nominating someone who gives to Ted Cruz's opponent? And should Ted Cruz be supporting somebody who gave to his opponent? Of course, but they didn't know that.
Yes.
You didn't know that until you have the data. So the data is really important. So that's what we're trying to do. And I hope the president will continue to rely on data to make decisions.
Yes. And again, back to who you know, I'll just use two words: Harriet Miers. Remember that? She was a lawyer, former White House counsel, friends of the Bushes. But
guess what we get? We get Sam Alito, who he and Thomas are 1 and 2, right? Or 1A and 1B on commitment to conservative principles.
Second time, sometimes good. Third time has never been a charm. We know that a few times with Kennedy and others. But nevertheless, there is a good illustration of why the research is important. Just want you to know the backstory. It's important because most of us just go, I don't know who the judges are. I don't know how they'd pick them or anything like that, but just want to let you know that there are very outstanding organizations behind that. And I'll make a quick pledge to First Liberty, because it cost you quite a bit to dig up all that data, didn't it?
It does. I mean, we have a team, we literally have a team of people that we've hired, and we always ask them, are you good doing this? Because you're basically in a cave doing research, and that's all you do, 8, 10, and they would, if they were listening, they will call and say 16 hours, because it comes in, we get the list, and we've got to act. But yes, a lot of time and effort.
Pedal to the metal. Okay, when we come back, Dr. Merrill Matthews, he knows something about this. This is his book on America Faces the Entitlement Cliff. We'll talk about Medicaid, and the next hour we'll get into the issue of welfare. There is so much misinformation. I hope that we can kind of clear it up. And he has some ideas on how Republicans can make this work without all the tricks. There have been all sorts of tricks and gimmicks in the past, and I think it's for a really important time for you to understand there's just an incredible amount out there on the internet that is just completely wrong about what is being proposed for Medicaid. So we'll come back and talk about that right after this.
It was once a given that a young person would graduate from high school, get a job, marry, and then and only then have children. No longer. Today, half of American babies are born to unmarried mothers. Economist Melissa Carney, author of The Two-Parent Privilege, says roughly 30% of kids in the U.S. live outside a two-parent home. The results are devastating. She says kids growing up in single-mother homes are 5 times more likely to live in poverty than kids growing up in married parent homes. Legislators in Tennessee recognize the problem. According to the Wall Street Journal, they are aiming to reorient public education towards students' long-term flourishing. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee recently signed a bill that amends the state's family life curricula to include discussion of marriage, family structure, and the importance of work. Schools in Tennessee will now teach a concept called the success sequence. Students will look at data which shows them that they're more likely to thrive if they graduate from high school, work full-time, and get married before having children. This wisdom is confirmed by the latest research. Brad Wilcox, professor of sociology at the University of Virginia and author of Get Married, Why Americans Must Defy the Elites, Forge Strong Families, and Save Civilization, says, no group of Americans are more financially secure than married men and women. As Melissa Carney explains, 2 parents combined have more resources than one. And beyond this economic benefit, she says, 2 adults in the household have more time than one alone, and they have more emotional bandwidth. Professor Wilcox says no group of Americans today are happier than married dads and married mothers. His research shows there's no group of guys who are more likely to end up dying deaths of despair, suicide, alcoholism, drug overdoses than less educated men who are single. Polling shows that teaching the success sequence is politically popular. More states should adopt it. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is our Friday weekend edition. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We've put quite a few of issues on the table. This is our 4th article. It is one that appeared in The Hill. And, of course, you can go and find it there, but we've also made it very easy for you to read it. And, again, Dr. Merrill Matthews, Republicans want to save $880 billion over 10 years in the Medicaid program. And it is something we've seen in the past. I'll go back to your book about entitlements and all the rest. This, by the way, was written, 6 years ago? It's gotten worse, hasn't it? A whole lot worse.
Not the book.
No, yeah. It's just that you almost have to update all of it again. But the bottom line has been all sorts of gimmicks and tricks and things like that. But you say that this time this would actually address a couple of issues, and there are kind of three ideas that Republicans bring to the table. So talk about that.
And I don't know what Republicans in the House are thinking on their Medicaid reform, because they're trying to micromanage Medicaid from the federal level. And so what Republicans and conservatives had been proposing for years, and this is sort of the standard thing, is you under the federal Medicaid program, federal state program, the federal government provides some money, the states provide some money. It's called a matching grant. But it's set up so that the states, if they do certain things, they can draw down more federal money. So the idea for decades, a couple, 3 decades, had been just block grant Medicaid. Say, state Texas, this is how much you're getting this year. We're going to block grant. We're going to take that money. We're going to give it to you. We're going to let it grow by inflation plus maybe 1 or 2%. And we're going to hand the money over to you, and then you can do what you want to. So we're block granting it to you. There's nothing you can do as a state to increase your Medicaid allotment unless the number of people growing on Medicaid. I mean, if you get a higher poverty level, then you can get some more. But we're just going to block grant it to you, and then you as a state, you'd have flexibility to do what you want to. Do you want to bring in and cover illegals, as California has been doing? You can do it. You just have to pay the difference as a state. Do you want to put people to work? We think that's great. You get the savings as the state, but we're going to let the states make their decisions as to how you do it. So it becomes that sort of laboratory of democracy. And then the third thing you would do is you would say, because the prescription drug issue in Medicaid is such a mess, where the federal law requires drug companies to give the states the lowest price, but then they have to give them rebates on those drugs, and then states say, well, if you want us to put it on the Medicaid list, you actually have to give us supplemental rebates, and we take that money and we'll tell you we use it on health care, but they can use it for anything. So I would say just go to a Part D like we have in Medicare. Most of the people who get Medicaid for insurance are already in a managed care plan, just as seniors who are on Medicare Advantage are, and the majority of seniors are on Medicare Advantage. But you let them go into the existing Part D program, just create one for Medicaid. The structure's already there, the companies are already doing it, and they're the prescription drug companies negotiate with the insurers and get lower prices, and the Part D program has grown much slower than they actually anticipated in the initial legislation when they passed it in 2003. So you do those three things. The federal government says we're block granting it, so we're not worried with what you're doing. You can't game the system. The states get a lot of flexibility to do what they want to, and you fix the prescription drug part of it. But they're not doing really any of that.
Yeah. Well, again, your point, you just said in passing, is one of the key points, and that is block grants would eliminate the economic incentives for states to game the system, because the problem in this first article, we're going to get to the issue of work in just a minute, is the governments, primarily blue states, have really gamed the system, haven't they?
Right. They have a way that they charge taxes to the hospitals. The hospitals pay this money. They call that Medicaid spending. The state then reverts it back to it, but it makes it look like their Medicaid spending is much higher. And just about 5 or 6 states, the federal government matches 50% with what the state spend on Medicaid. But when you go to Mississippi, I think it's like the federal government pays 72, 73% of it. And because from a state standpoint, if the federal government's covering nearly a 75% of what you're spending on Medicaid. In other words, you can spend an extra $1 and only it costs you 25 cents at the state level. You have an economic incentive to try to expand this as far as you can, because then you get the political benefits of these people who are being covered. And especially in blue states, they can come up and say, so many of my people are employed, are covered by this. And there's in Medicaid is so big. I think roughly 40% of all births in the country are paid for by Medicaid.
There you go. I'm glad you brought that up.
In Texas, it's about 50%. In New Mexico, I think it's roughly 75% of the births are paid for by Medicaid.
That's not how it was intended.
It's not how it was intended. Yeah. And so Medicaid has expanded to be a huge program where they hit nearly 100 million Americans were on it. It was in the 90s, 92, 93 million. They scaled that back, but we're still significantly higher number of people on Medicaid than we had before the pandemic.
You know, one of the things that Gary Bowers puts out is the end of day report, and each day he starts with it. This one, it's day 130 of President Trump's second term. No one has lost their Social Security, Medicare, or veterans benefits in spite of constant media and leftist lies. Because the issue here is, this is Medicaid. These are poor people. We're going to throw poor people out on the street. They're not going to be able to have access to health care and all of the rest. And in some respects, you're trying in 2 pages with a lot of white space, quite frankly, to explain that those lies, which are going to be certainly very rampant during this next election cycle, are just lies. They're not true at all.
Here is another thing. You have people who, seniors who are getting unable to live on their own, so they go to the nursing home. The families come in and with what they call elder care attorneys who figure out you could have a lot of money. You could have millions of dollars, and they figure out how to move that over to a trust or hide the assets so that the federal government then comes in and pays for the person being in the nursing home. That goes on, and that's where a lot of the real expenses are, is these various ways to game the system for both disability and for people in nursing homes.
Yeah, and the way I look at it, I mean, it's as you mentioned, it's a program that is outgrown its original intention.
Exactly, yes.
And so you've got just this, I mean, a massive amount of money, a massive amount of red tape in the program. And anytime you do that, you're excluding the free market, right? And then you have all the incentives are reversed. And so you have incentives not to be competitive. You have incentives to game the system and all these things. So it's just, I mean, it is a bear of a problem. And I mean, the day of reckoning is coming, right? Because the increased costs we cannot sustain. We talk about these issues across, you know, for deficit and everything else. I mean, this program is just, the rates of growth are incredible.
Medicaid is also pays for oral care, dental care for people with with terrible teeth. But we've here in Texas, one company figured out how to game this system, and we were paying more for child orthodontics, that is braces for children, than all the other we were spending more than all the other states combined.
Yes.
And so one of the local news channels flew over the guy who owned this thing, flew over his house, and he had a water park in the back.
Yeah.
And other things, because and they've interviewed some of the kids, and you had these 4 kids, all African American of color. They had great teeth, and they all had braces on their teeth because they figured out how to game this system. They would give them a pizza coupon if they would come in and get new braces. It's just a scam that keeps on coming.
And it's such a huge that when I was at the Attorney General's office in Texas, we had dedicated people that all they did was fraud. And same thing with the federal government. We combine with the Fed prosecutors and the state prosecutors because, like that gentleman with his water park in his backyard. You don't have a water park in your backyard, Dr. Matthews?
We put one of the blow-up pools up there so we can...
We need to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the other aspect of that. Should we make people that are able-bodied and receiving welfare benefits work? I think you know the answer to that. Matter of fact, that's in one of our booklets on work. But we'll take a break. Be back with more right after this.
Many years ago, they began saying that we live in the information age. Well, today there is so much information coming at us from every direction. The hardest thing is to discern which issues are really important and how can I make a positive impact without wasting my time trying to figure out accurate information. Let me give you a suggestion to help with that. Visit pointofview.net. Look at the tabs across the top. Find the one named Viewpoints. Kerby Anderson and others on our team are constantly watching for news to identify those issues that you really need to know about. They boil things down in a brief summary, and then you can decide if it's something on which you want to learn more and get involved. Again, when you go to pointofview.net, click on Viewpoints, you'll see exactly what I mean. You'll see the issues that we are covering right now. And when you like what you see, I honestly think you will, you can slide on over, enter your email, and get them automatically sent to your inbox each day. That's it. Take a minute now, be informed. Pointofview.net, click on Viewpoints. Point of View will continue after this.
I just wanted to tell you, too, how much I have appreciated Point of View over the years. I've always been taught that we take care of our own, and I feel like Point of View is one of our own because of the Christian worldview that you do promote. And so I have become a partner today, and I just want to thank you so much, and just God bless you for all that you do.
Listen, I wanted to make a quick comment. I'm a relatively new listener to the show, and I really kind of stumbled upon it more than anything because I'm doing some driving now that I wasn't in the past. And my comment really is, I think you guys and gals are more right on about the assessment of this country right now than anything I've heard. You know, I go home and I tell my wife, you've got to hear what they're talking about on the show. It's just so right on. And I tell my parents the same thing.
I'm 25 years old, and I started listening to Point of View about 4 years ago, and it has changed the way that I think and the way that I view the world around me.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. One of the things we're going to get into this hour, first of all, is another article by Dr. Merrill Matthews about whether people on welfare should work. But let me set this in context for just a minute. Of course, we talked about his book, America Faces the Entitlement Crisis. But let's just, as I went to the debt clock just a minute ago, we're at $36.9 trillion. So essentially, we're going to be at $37 trillion of national debt. Sooner or later, and I'm afraid it's going to be sooner, that's going to be a real problem. And when we went to Greece, we also went to Turkey because it's over there in Ephesus. And I'll hold up for those of you watching online. These are Turkish lira. There's a $1,000 note. There's a $20, 10, 5, whatever. The whole amount here isn't worth $20, to be perfectly blunt, because in Turkey right now, the guide was just saying this sort of offhandedly, we have 50% inflation. I mean, it's like, well, it's 80 degrees today and we have 50% inflation. I mean, they're just almost resigned to the fact. Just imagine that every year your amount of money, if you have it in savings at all, is cut in half. Mm-hmm. You can't plan for the future. You can't build a business. Nothing's getting built because contractors don't know what the lumber is going to be, what the concrete's going to be. They can't plan anything, and so nothing is happening. Of course, I can look at other examples. I've got, of course, a Venezuela Boulevard, if you'd like to see that one. But my all-time favorite, nobody's exceeded this. This is a $1 trillion note for Zimbabwe in Africa, which is not even worth the paper it's printed on. Now, are we there? No. Could we be there someday? Maybe. But if we don't begin to figure out either how to cut spending, and look how that's worked out for Elon Musk, or increase growth, Scott Bessett, call your office, we've got some problems. But the bottom line is, Dr. Merrill Matthews, you have a section here where the Republicans have a requirement that if indeed you're receiving welfare, it could be SNAP, that'd be food stamps, it could be Medicaid, whatever it might be, you should work. And one of your lines is, it cannot be emphasized strongly enough, requiring able-bodied people to work for their taxpayer-funded benefits, whether it's food, housing, Medicaid, or any other means-tested assistance program, is not punishment. I'll hold up my booklet on work. As Christians, we recognize work is affirming because we're created in the image of God. And it does seem to me right now that everybody is complaining on the left about the fact that we're going to ask people who are not disabled, not pregnant, not incarcerated, whatever, to actually work. And we think that it makes sense to give people a hand up, but not a handout.
Well, there are two primary reasons why you require people to work. The first one is, with any kind of welfare where you're handing out benefits, the question is, how do you determine the people who need it versus the people who don't need it, the people who shouldn't be in there? Once you say, we're going to let you have the benefits, but you're going to have to work for it, then you have people who can go ahead and find a job and work. They oftentimes say, well, if I've got to work for it, I'll go find my own job. I'm here to get free benefits. And so you segregate the people who don't need to be in the system. That allows you to focus on the people who do need to be in the system. And the second reason you do this is because working is empowering. it helps create dignity. It's one of the few places where we agree with Karl Marx, because Karl Marx would point out in Das Kapital that people associate with who they are. When you meet somebody, what's your name? How old, or where do you come from? What do you do? And that we identify with who we are and what we do. And so once people have been out of that system for a while, they begin to lose self-respect. They begin to feel like I can't go out and get a job. Their children or family members maybe begin to lose respect for them also, because they feel like they're just hangers-on. They're always needing money, and we've got to help them. So it forces people to go out and find a job. The trick is to find a way to get them into an employment where they find something, a fulfilling employment that works for them, and get them on-the-job training. The Republicans are willing to let them go to college or do training. I'd scratch all that. The best training is on-the-job training. We're not talking about mathematicians and engineers here. We're talking about people who generally are lower income, don't have skills, don't have the education, and so forth. So you start with a job that you can work with and that has on-the-job training, and that gets you going. That's the way you get this started. And when we did it with welfare benefits at the state level in the 90s, Tommy Thompson, we've talked about that. Oregon did a great job. Bill Clinton finally signed legislation in 96, if I remember right. He came in wanting welfare reform, and finally, after he vetoed 2 bills that required work, he finally signed the third one, and he had some of the people in his administration resign in disgust.
I remember
because
that.
you're going to make people work for their benefits. But if those of us who have jobs, who have employer-provided health insurance, roughly 180 million Americans, we work for our health care. And so the notion that it's a punishment for somebody else to get it from the taxpayer, it just is mind-boggling.
I was just thinking, Jeff, that we right now see all sorts of help wanted signs. So for somebody to say, well, wait a minute, there's no jobs out there. There are lots of jobs that are just simply going unfilled.
No, I think we see it all the time. You go to almost anywhere, any retail establishment, and you'll see a work, wanting people to work. I think the other thing, Dr. Matthews, that you've talked about before, and I think your article even mentions, the left will come up with the example, oh, this is unfair, but there are so many exceptions. If you're pregnant, you don't have to,
right.
If you're
disabled.
a certain age, you don't have to.
Right.
And so there's so many exceptions that really what we're talking about are able-bodied people who don't have another or you have children under a certain age. I guess that's the other one. But all those are carved out. What we're saying are these able-bodied people, and of course the biblical principle. I mean, this is addressed in the Bible. If you don't work, then you shouldn't get to eat.
Second Thessalonians. Yeah.
And I'll point out that the opponents of this will step up and say, well, most of the people who could work are already working. Well, then why are you opposing it? I mean,
that's right. Test us.
If it doesn't really affect anything. And so and then the other thing, which was left out of the column, they edited out. But I said, people with low-income people will say, well, I've got family members, I've got struggles, I've got kids at home, I need to take care of them. But so do people who work. I mean, there's nothing new about that. There are a lot of people who work, get their health insurance from their employer, but they're struggling to make everything. They may have 2 jobs. They may have 2 or 3 kids at home, maybe single moms or single dads. They may have a parent they're trying to take care of. All of that may be true for low-income people, but it's true for middle and high-income people as well. And we have to work through that in order to sort of make everything happen.
Let's open up the phones. I suspect you're going to have some comments. Maybe you're working 2 jobs to try to keep your family at least somewhat within the financial needs that you have right now. And what about the individuals that you may know of or have run into? Because we're talking about, we'll give you some of those numbers in just a minute, of the number of people who have gone on to any kind of disability, those who have gone on to different welfare programs. Love to get your thoughts about this, because this is perhaps one of the more contentious parts of the Republican package, and I wanted to get your thoughts, and I also wanted you to read this article by Dr. Merrill Matthews. So if you'd like to join us, you think people should work for welfare, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, one phrase I frequently use on my radio program is this. Each year, researchers spend millions of dollars to discover what most moms already know. This comment certainly applies to a study reported a few weeks ago in Fortune. Here's the headline. Women are more empathetic than men. Study of hundreds of thousands of people finds. Women are more empathetic than men. Who knew? Just about everybody with a little common sense, but we live in a world that seems lacking in common sense. This was best illustrated by a sarcastic tweet posted by Dr. Michael Brown. He said this study leads to two startling revelations. First, there is such a thing as women and men. Second, there are real differences between women and men. You know, I thought we couldn't give an accurate definition of a woman. We have a Supreme Court justice who could not answer the question, what is a woman? We also have the film documentary by Matt Walsh, What is a Woman?, that provides numerous interviews with experts who cannot answer that question. But if you're going to be doing a study of the differences between men and women, I would think you would have to have a clear understanding of how to define the two sexes. Of course, the researchers had to ask the question in a politically correct way. What was your biological sex assigned at birth? Of course, the second point about men and women being different is also controversial in our politically correct society. 30 years ago, relationship counselor John Gray wrote the book Men Are From Mars, Women From Venus. It has sold at least 15 million copies. But if the book came out today, I suspect there would be protest in the streets. Let's applaud a study that confirms the obvious and challenges some of the crazy woke ideas in our society. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we'll take some phone calls in just a minute, 1-800-351-1212. But let's talk about the extent of what we're dealing with right now. I was thinking about a commentary that I had come out about the middle of last month, talking about manufacturing jobs. And the bottom line is, if we're going to add 2 to 3 million more jobs, the reality is that we already have thousands of openings already. So first of all, we've got to get some people. I think the estimates are about 7 million men of working age who are not working and not looking for work. Mm-hmm. So they're obviously receiving benefits or living off of mom and dad's dime. And I think we need to encourage people to go and work. And so before we start saying, well, we just need to import a lot more people through open borders and immigration, how about getting the people here to do some work? And so that's why this is a big issue.
It is a really big issue, and you want people going back to work. And because we have a historically low unemployment rate right now, I think it's 4.1, 2, 3%, something like that, which typically in years past was considered full employment. It was only because we were in the threes that economists said, well, my goodness, we can do even better than that. But yeah, once you get under 4%, it's just really hard to find anybody to go to work. You have to start bumping up salaries and other things to try to get them to come in. So yes, you have people out there who could go to work. You need to make sure you get them in. And even seniors. We have actually a fairly small percentage of seniors continue to work past, say, 65. And it'd be good to have them in part-time jobs and other things things if they want to do it, just in order to fill some of these jobs.
Let me answer that question too, because a lot of people are saying, well, then Dr. Matthews just say we have very few people that are unemployed. But that gets back to the way we calculate this. If I'm not looking for work,
Right.
I'm not in the unemployment list. So the reality is that it looks good on paper, because if you're not looking for work, you're not seen as unemployed.
Right.
Only the federal government would come up with something like that, but there you go.
You have to be looking, if I remember right, in the last 6 weeks, you have to be looking for a job. If you're not looking for a job, and there are students who aren't looking for jobs and others, but that's the labor force participation rate that we have out there, and it's gone up and down. But if people can get welfare benefits without working, many of them will. That's not a criticism. They're just able to take money and don't have to work. Some of them will like it that way.
So again, just some, I think, illustrations of exactly what we're talking about here. And give us some numbers, because I think you had here 165 million Americans under the age of 65 and their dependents, and about 60% of them currently have employer-provided health insurance, which, again, as you point out, they work for their health insurance.
Right.
It's not a punishment. But then you have...
It's a benefit.
It's a benefit. But the other page, then, you get into the fact that as the pandemic unfolded, you had more and more people applying for disability. They weren't disabled. They just said, well, I don't need to go to work, and I'll just work out of my home, and eventually I just stay home.
Anytime we get a recession, we see the claims for disability benefits increase, and there are even people out there, psychiatrists and others, who essentially lecture children on what to say if they go and say, I have a disability, so that they'll get that granted. So that happens. And, we have people, if you're here illegally and you have a child who is a citizen that you had here in the United States, that child may be able to get benefits, and the child, if he's 4 or 5 years old, is not able to manage those funds. So the parents get the benefit of the funds. So we need to be able to get people out there in the workforce, because we need them filling the jobs that we have right now, and especially if Trump is successful in bringing more industry back to the states.
Well, again, I think one other point that we'll make, and maybe we'll move on, you end it by saying we have very encouraging stories about how individuals who gain their dignity by once again providing for themselves and their families, they discover that work is empowering, and sometimes they just need a little bit of a push to get started.
Back in the 90s, when the states were doing this, I would go on television in Washington, and they'd have people who would call in, people who had been off on benefits for years and felt like they just couldn't hold a job down, but the way this particular employment element worked, they were able to get back into a job, work for several months. They got the sort of the sense of being able to go back to work, and then started getting skills again. Were able to stay with that job, bring home an income, and they would say, I've got new respect for myself. My family has respect for me. My kids see me bringing home money. I'm now able to pay for our apartment and other things. It's just that it is just good for people to be able to work.
One of the other things you said, Jeff, was you had worked in the Attorney General's office, and they have a whole, it sounds like, division just to deal with the issue of fraud. And I'm running into more and more people that read one of my commentaries or one of Penna's commentaries that pull me over and say, you're right. I know people that game the system all the time. And some of the stories we're telling here maybe aren't all of the individuals that are under the poverty line, but there's a significant amount that in the Attorney General office you had to address.
Right, and it says something about the state of our society, right? That we have such lack of character, lack of the lack of influence of Christian morals and thoughts. I think of my dad who worked every day of his life, probably starting like at 12 or 13, and the concept that he would somehow fake an injury in order to get government. I mean, the worst thing is to receive government benefits. I know I've even had conversations with him now that he's a little bit older that, like, you could get some. I mean, he doesn't want, in his words, a handout.
Right.
I said, well, you're entitled to them. You've worked. He's now in his 80s, and I said, you're entitled to. Oh no, I'm not. I don't want that. When they give things away. And I remember my grandmother, commenting on that. But that ethic now, it's like, well, where are the freebies? I want to show up. Where, what's free? But that, to me, I mean, we're reaping what we sowed, and just this lack of work ethic, and I mean, we just see it so much. And now I'm sounding like an old person talking about younger generations, and we're not going to have anybody throw us anything about the younger generation, but they're just saying we have a lack of work ethic in our country.
It's an interesting point. A guy who fixes my air conditioner was out the other day, and he was leaving, and we were talking a little bit about jobs, and he said, I'm proud I've never had to take any welfare benefits.
There you go. Yeah.
He's an air conditioner repairman, so he's probably doing better than all of us, but at that rate. But yes, there was a time when people said, I'm glad I've never had to go to the government for something, and that has changed to some extent where people want to. And just to be very clear, Medicaid is welfare. If you're getting Medicaid, you are on welfare. And the interesting thing is, governors used to come up and say, while I was governor, we got X number of people off the welfare benefits. But now they say, I'm glad we're able to get more people on welfare benefits.
And let's get back to that idea of shame, because you were talking about that with your dad. Maybe you saw the movie Cinderella Man, that's the fighter, James Broderick. And if you've watched that, there's one point there where it's gotten so bad that he's actually had to go on what they call relief. We don't even use that phrase anymore. And it was shameful to him. And then later he becomes successful as a boxer, and he pays it all back because he did not want to. And so you think about an individual that says, I've never had to go on welfare. You think of going back during the Great Depression. I did not want to go on welfare, didn't want to go on relief. Things have changed rather dramatically, haven't they?
Yes, they have. And people want to get their fair share of it because it's free money. And just to be very honest about this, liberals and progressives encourage that. With respect to Medicaid, when you talk about people who shouldn't be getting Medicaid, people who are not really qualified, but they're getting it, for the liberal aspect, they don't really care because they feel like everybody should be getting government-run health care anyway. So the notion that you don't really qualify for Medicaid is not a problem for the liberal because we want you to have government-run health care anyway.
Well, again, we're running out of money, and we don't want to spend it on the one side to individuals on welfare that could work. But what about on the other side, sending our tax dollars to places like Harvard? So after we come back from the break, one of the individuals that I used to interview, but now you get to interview him all the time, John Fund, along with David Simon, said, well, don't start with Harvard. And so we want to get into this because this battle right now between Harvard University and Trump is really going to be around for a while. I know that one of our upcoming Outlook issues is going to be on that very issue because it surfaces how much money should nonprofits receive, how much money should federal governments give to higher education, all sorts of very important issues.
Should they be tax exempt?
Yeah, they're all tax exempt. And this piece by John Fund goes into a lot more than just Harvard. But what about going and allowing a nonprofit like the Gates Foundation with what? $75 billion of endowment. So we're going to get into that issue, and then maybe even to the whole issue of corporate America and progressive activists. Got a lot to cover. We'll try to do our best right after these important messages.
The Bible tells us not to worry, and yet there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes even knowing what to pray can be difficult. And that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week, you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, we're going to spend some time, first of all, talking about this conflict between Harvard University and Donald Trump, or the Trump administration. Now, it's broader than that, but I thought it was kind of interesting because Donald Trump, as we reported a couple of weeks ago, wanted to actually get rid of the tax-exempt status for Harvard University. And you might say, well, that's not going to happen. Well, then go ask our friends at Bob Jones University that had that happen to them. Is it going to happen? I don't know. But because John Fund is somebody that all of us around the table know, and most recently Dr. Merrill Matthews has interviewed him a couple of times, when this one came out, don't stop with Harvard, I had to put this one down. Let me just say that a very good piece that I was thinking of putting up here, but I didn't want Karen to have finger problems, maybe carpal tunnel from typing all of them. There's a good point-counterpoint between Steven Pinker, who's at Harvard, trying to defend why Harvard deserves a tax-exempt status, and Stanley Kurtz, who said, no, I think some of the criticism of Harvard is very legitimate. But we didn't post that there, but you might want to find that. But Dr. Merrill Matthews, let me come to this because a federal judge blocked Donald Trump's new ban on Harvard enrolling foreign students. So we'll see where that goes. There's also been an attempt to try to remove Harvard University from its tax-exempt status. And so I want to get your thoughts, and of course then we'll get into the legal issue, but let's recognize that right now Harvard and other universities pay little or no tax on billions of dollars of investments. Right. They avoid taxes on millions of dollars of football, basketball, and other sports programs. And then you have some other nonprofits, and we'll just pick on Bill Gates for a minute. The Gates Foundation has an endowment, hold your breath for this one, of $75 billion. And so once you head down that road, maybe all the churches will lose their tax-exempt status. But there is a question that's being raised all for the first time. How rich are you? How much endowment do you have before maybe we shouldn't allow you to have a tax exemption?
And there's so many things involved here, because Harvard gets money for students, for classes and so forth, but they get money for research, and that I would put that in a different category. Do we want to put them both in the same place? But you also have the endowment. I think Harvard's about $50 billion right now, and it's one of the best investment areas out there. And there are people who follow what Harvard does so that they invest in the same way that Harvard does, because they've been so good at it. And then you have to ask the question, if you've got $50 billion and you were just earning, let's say you were earning 10% off that, can't you run most of the school without even having to charge? So it's such a big question. And then if you go from Harvard to the nonprofit foundations, there are a lot of groups, I suspect, Point of View may receive money from nonprofit foundations. There are a lot of nonprofit foundations out there who fund think tanks and other things, but they also do. The George Soros Foundation funds a lot of bad stuff.
Yes.
So, and then if you go into the churches, I have had churches say they're small churches, but they have property, they have land.
Yeah.
And if they end up having to pay property taxes on that because their tax-exempt status is removed, then are they even able to stay in business or continue operating? So it's a huge question, and I don't know where we'll draw the line on that, but I'm not opposed at all at some of the things being taken away from Harvard. It's just it really asks the question, where do we draw a line on that?
Yeah, I like John Fund. I completely disagree with him, and I guess
I knew everybody around the table would. But I
completely disagree with abolishing for nonprofits. And that I'm not defending. I'm not defending Harvard.
First Liberty's a nonprofit.
Well, First Liberty's a nonprofit.
The think tanks
Point of View's a
nonprofit.
Yeah,
Point of View's a nonprofit.
Yeah, and the idea is you serve the public good, and obviously for religious organizations, I think there's a further complication and sort of you go back to the First Amendment if you started polling on religious entities, and that's been there's a case at the Supreme Court right now where the state of Wisconsin is attempting to determine whether a Catholic organization is Catholic enough. And just think, if sitting here in Dallas, if First Baptist Dallas didn't have tax exemption, had to pay for its property in the central business district or a little bit outside, if Prestonwood had to pay for its huge campus, or Lake Point and Rockwall, it would fundamentally impact. And so I get that Harvard may be a bad actor, but there are lots of very worthy organizations who deserve, and the rationale, because these organizations are serving the public good. And at the end of the day, I mean, Samaritan's Purse, I mean, we can just, I mean, the long list.
Let me add one thing that some people might, especially when you mention Catholic, if you are engaged, and we'll use the Catholic Church for a moment, in what's called unrelated business income, then you do pay taxes on that. So I don't want people to think that, well, then they're getting off scot-free, because there are all sorts of different aspects of that which do generate income. But when we first had the tax policy, go back to 1913, and I looked at the original congressional records, there was a question asked very early on. I think it was Cordell Hull asked, well, should churches have to pay taxes? And the argument is, well, if churches or other religious organizations, and later they expanded to the nonprofit organizations, don't have a profit, well, you'd only pay taxes on profits, right? And so that was where the idea came from. But you can see that there are a lot of people, including a friend of the ministry who we've interviewed many times here on Point of View, John Fund, who said, hey, don't stop with Harvard. So you can see, if he's saying that as a conservative, think of what the liberals are thinking about right now.
Yeah, but I think what he does is open up a good discussion as to what should and should not be taxed, and what should and should not receive funds. Because on the one hand, you could say, for instance, Harvard shouldn't be receiving federal funds, but they should be able to keep their tax exempt status. Or you may think you want to get rid of both of them. So I think it's a good discussion we have not had in a long time. People have sort of touched on it, the notion that Harvard's got this lot of money. A lot of major universities have huge amounts of funds that they're able to make huge investments with and don't pay any taxes on. So there's a discussion here as to where you draw that line.
Well, and I think there's a connection between the two before we take a break, and that is, we've already pointed out that we're at almost $37 trillion in national debt. We have unfunded liabilities that are in the $200 trillion range. What are we going to have to do if we want to make sure that people get their Social Security benefits, they get Medicare, they get Medicaid? I mean, you can see that an individual that is more secular-minded, or even the previous president, Joe Biden, saying, well, why should all these churches and conservative groups get all these tax-exempt benefits, because they're actually domestic terrorists anyway? You can see how that argument could play out when all of a sudden we don't have enough money to pay for the various what are called entitlements, the various kinds of functions that government needs to engage in.
And again, I'm convinced we don't have a revenue problem.
We have a spending
problem. And if we give them more money, they're not going to address the spending problem. So I am not in favor of giving them more money at all. They've got to address the spending problem.
And as I pointed out before the pandemic, if you had $5 trillion a year coming in, you could fund the federal government. And we still have about $5 trillion coming in every year to the federal government. The problem is we have $7 trillion of expenses, and there's the problem.
Well, to meet Jeff's goal, you could tax the endowment, the profits the endowment makes, and cut the spending going to Harvard, and you'd be able to do increase income and decrease spending at the same time.
Well, anyway, those are just a couple of thoughts. There have been people over the years that have said, well, are churches someday going to lose their tax-exempt status? I don't see that happening in the near future, although John Fund seems to be on the front end of that parade right now, and there are others talking about it.
I mean, the left has made those arguments that churches should. So that's what you see someone like John Fund, who's a noted conservative. To me, he's playing into the left, because the left does believe that churches, especially we have these cases representing churches who got involved in the election. And so you have the arguments, you ought to lose your tax exemption because, you had a pastor preach about, the crazy stuff that the left is doing, crazy thing that Democrats are doing. So we have a handful of churches that got little nasty letters from the IRS opening investigations. Of course, it just seems like there was an election and now those investigations are going away. And imagine that.
There's some other churches that let the liberals come in and speak.
And they don't get letters.
And they don't get letters, and they do what they call walking around money, where the bus comes up and picks them up after church and takes them over to the polling booth so that they can vote.
I always thought the British system was pretty, you would have a party before the pool's open, and you give them, and then you have a party after if you win.
That's pretty good. Well, we were having some fun with that, but if you're wondering about the tax-exempt status of your church, this piece by John Fund, I see, definitely generated some controversy and some questions. We come back just real quickly, a couple things. These progressive activists, think Bud Light, Disney, Target, some others, there has been interesting pushback. So we want to talk about that, and also Penn and Dexter's commentary on the success sequence. We'll talk about that right after this.
It was once a given that a young person would graduate from high school, get a job, marry, and then and only then have children. No longer. Today, half of American babies are born to unmarried mothers. Economist Melissa Carney, author of The Two-Parent Privilege, says roughly 30% of kids in the U.S. live outside a two-parent home. The results are devastating. She says kids growing up in single-mother homes are 5 times more likely to live in poverty than kids growing up in married parent homes. Legislators in Tennessee recognize the problem. According to the Wall Street Journal, they are aiming to reorient public education towards students' long-term flourishing. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee recently signed a bill that amends the state's family life curricula to include discussion of marriage, family structure, and the importance of work. Schools in Tennessee will now teach a concept called the success sequence. Students will look at data which shows them that they're more likely to thrive if they graduate from high school, work full-time, and get married before having children. This wisdom is confirmed by the latest research. Brad Wilcox, professor of sociology at the University of Virginia and author of Get Married, Why Americans Must Defy the Elites, Forge Strong Families, and Save Civilization, says, no group of Americans are more financially secure than married men and women. As Melissa Carney explains, 2 parents combined have more resources than one. And beyond this economic benefit, she says, 2 adults in the household have more time than one alone, and they have more emotional bandwidth. Professor Wilcox says no group of Americans today are happier than married dads and married mothers. His research shows there's no group of guys who are more likely to end up dying deaths of despair, suicide, alcoholism, drug overdoses than less educated men who are single. Polling shows that teaching the success sequence is politically popular. More states should adopt it. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention that during this period of time when we take a break, we oftentimes hear the commentary by Penna Dexter. Hers is Success Sequence. And if you would like to receive the Viewpoints commentaries, we've talked about this before, mine will arrive in your inbox Monday through Friday. Hers will land in your inbox on Saturday. Mine today has to do with empathy, research which was done that found that women are more empathetic than men. Who knew? Matter of fact, one of my favorite lines I open with is each year your researchers spend millions of dollars to discover what most moms already know. Yeah. But nevertheless, the one before that was on John Locke, one on the mission field, one on digital discernment. That if you aren't receiving those, we are glad to send them to you free of charge. So we'll get to that in just a minute. But I thought we would end with this one by Brittany Bernstein, but she's actually quoting from David Bahnsen. You and I, of course, knew Greg Bahnsen, his father, but David Bahnsen's been on a few times, and he has worked with other individuals, including people at Alliance Defending Freedom, to really address this issue of wokeism and how, in some respects, these corporations thought that the best way to reach out was to actually embrace woke ideas. Just ask the executives that are still there at Bud Light how that's working out, or Target, Disney, a variety of others. And so, you've got some victories here that they've had with PepsiCo and victories with, I was trying to think of some of the other ones there, Lockheed Martin and J.P. Morgan Chase and a variety of others. And it does seem to me that we're seeing, Dr. Matthews, a pushback, a rather significant pushback, not only in the corporate world, not only in the retail world, but even in the corporate world as well, where a lot of people around the boards rooms thought, well, we'll just be more woke, we'll attract more customers, and they found out just the opposite.
Just the opposite happened. and a number of there's been several news stories about CEOs who've come on when they've done the quarterly call about what happened that past quarter, and how few times they mention the whole DEI thing now. They're now talking about what they're doing to make money, what's happening with their jobs, giving the forward guidance, which the forward guidance has sort of been cut short because nobody knows what things are going to look like with the tariffs. But it has been a sea change in what's happened with employers as they've backed off of this now. And it's almost like Mary Barr, who I mentioned earlier, of the CEO of GM, who was 4 months ago all about EVs, and now we're all about V8 engines that we're now creating. We're opening up a new plant where we're making V8 engines and other things. They just change with the times, but the times now has become just much more practical and realistic.
One of the things I thought was kind of interesting is that you have a number of corporations now that are backing off from the Human Rights Campaign survey. A couple of years ago on a lark, I went to an ExxonMobil shareholders meeting, which is held right there in Morton Meyerson, and sitting right in front of me were the people from the Human Rights Campaign. And they were upset because ExxonMobil did not have a same-sex policy for them, because it was one of the, I think it was Fortune 10 that did not. But it brings me to, of course, Jeff Mateer, because many of your clients have gotten caught up in this kind of wokeism that simply says if you work for Alaska Airlines or PepsiCo, or in this case, they talk about IBM or a variety of others, and you don't go along with some of these woke ideas, you will be fired, and then you have to try to defend them in court.
No, we've got several of those matters where, it's DEI run mad, and if you do not toe the company line, then you're going to lose your job. And then so many, in each of our cases, it's where some policy conflicts with their Christian beliefs, and so they lose it. I think to me, what these corporate resolutions are very powerful. It's a ploy that the left has been using, in environmental and others. They use these shareholder resolutions, and the companies do have to address them. So I think I give them a lot of credit. I've been in meetings with the Alliance Defending Freedom, Jeremy Tedesco, who's very, very much involved in this. And I think, some creative, we're kind of, using the left's playbook to run a play against them that I think is extremely effective.
So again, those are just a couple of things that I thought we might put on the table there just to give you a chance to know a little bit more about all of those issues. But just before we wind down, let me mention that we have Penna Dexter's piece here, and this comes from a couple of sources, but one that I've been following for some time, a man by the name of Dr. Brad Wilcox, who's a professor of sociology at the University of Virginia, has written all sorts of books. One that she mentions here, Get Married, Why Americans Must Defy the Elites, Forge Strong Families, and Save Civilization. Because Dr. Matthews, you were talking about, first of all, how about half of all the births in some of these states are on Medicaid. Well, the other part, half of all American babies are born to unmarried mothers.
Right.
And so what used to be rare has become routine. And the best way, I know this is not politically correct, but the best way to raise a child is with two parents, a father and a mother. And there is a real need to, as they're now teaching in places like Tennessee, the success sequence. Graduate from high school, school, don't get married until you've graduated, don't have children until you're married, as simple as that is, it almost guarantees you won't be beneath the poverty line.
You know, the Heritage Foundation's longtime welfare person, Robert Rector, used to say the best solution, the solution for low-income poverty is to have a stable two-parent family. You get that done, you by and large, you've got two incomes coming in. You provide stability for the kids and so forth, and they will usually rise up to the top over years. And so that's the solution to poverty. And at one time, he was trying to figure out if you could do legislation about that. And I said, I'm not sure you can do legislation about that. But the issue is a stable two-parent family fixes a lot of problems.
And by the way, I might just say that there's one good example of where I think pastors in the church really need to address that issue. Pastors need to address the work ethic, which we've just talked about, need to address the idea that marriage and family are important, and we'll see where that unfolds. But since I only have about 2 minutes left, I always like to end with a prayer target, and the one I'm going to focus on today is on June 4th. It's hard to believe, but next week is June. So June 4th, you had a federal appeals court date for Christian families in California. But this affects more than just families in California. Jeff, tell us what's going on.
Yeah, so Wednesday, June 4th, an argument at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the case is parents being excluded from participating in a state-funded program solely because of religion. And so it's a follow-up to our victory at the U.S. Supreme Court in the Carson v. Macon case. But these parents, a set of 3 parents, were excluded from receiving reimbursements for curriculum because the state says it's religious and we're not going to pay for religious things. So it's an important case, not just for California parents, but parents across the country.
We also had a Supreme Court case that ended up 4-4. And,
yes, very disappointing.
And so there's some things that maybe we'll talk about next week in terms of that. But I did want to cover, and I think I did. There's 7 articles there, 2 of which are from First Liberty, 2 from Dr. Merrill Matthews. Of course, we have the one on tariffs, and a couple of other issues. And if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to read about this again, feel free to go to the website, pointofview.net. One of the organizations we, of course, feature from time to time is First Liberty, and you can actually get their report that comes out, and all you have to do is click on that picture of Jeff Mateer, scroll down to the bottom, and sign up, and then you'll know some of the prayer targets for them. As I have mentioned before, we also would encourage you to go to the website, subscribe to the Viewpoints commentary, which we've already talked about there as well. But since I'm out of time, let me first of all say that it's been good to get back in the saddle. Looking forward to that. I want to thank Megan for help engineering the program. Karen, thank you for producing the program. Our other producer, Steve, I think he's in England today, isn't he? So everybody's been traveling, and we'll get everybody back front and center. But we look forward to seeing you next week right here on Point of View.
It almost seems like we live in a different world from many people in positions of authority. They say men can be women and women men. People are prosecuted differently or not at all, depending on their politics. Criminals are more valued and rewarded than law-abiding citizens. It's so overwhelming, so demoralizing. You feel like giving up. But we can't. We shouldn't. We must not. As Winston Churchill said to Britain in the darkest days of World War II, never give in, never give in, never, 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 never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And that's what we say to you today. This is not a time to give in, but to step up and join Point of View in providing clarity in the chaos. We can't do it alone, but together, with God's help, we will overcome the darkness. Invest in biblical clarity today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.